But to Muslims, Abraham and his family descended way down into the Arabian Peninsula, to the midmost region, to Mecca, where the mosque was erected. And to Muslims, this was not due to the jealousy of Sarah, even though many Muslim commentators copied the old stories from the Israelite sources. But we have in a hadith of Sahih Bukhari that Abraham was actually following God's directive, which has the obvious outcome that the message of truth will be delivered in that region as well. Why would God's message be confined only to one people occupying just one little country in the entire world? Obviously, God created everyone, and His mercy will extend everywhere to everyone. So, to Muslims, Ishmael is also very important. And the reason he does not get prominent mention in the Bible is because the Bible is told from the point of view of the descendants of Isaac, who try to explain why one son is, though being the second-born, has prominence. And again here, though being second-born, he has the prominence. Here too, though being second-born, he has the prominence. The history is written by the winners. So I hope that answers your question. I know that you may have a response to that, and that's okay as well. I'd like to hear that. But we see a continuous pattern here in the way that the stories are being told. Any other questions or any comment?
Can I come back on that?
Sure, yeah.
You make quite a lot of use of saying that scholars will see that as a literary device, when I think conservative scholars would regard Genesis as literal history. And the Bible is actually making a point by the fact that it's inherited through the second-born all the time. You have Isaac, then you have Jacob inheriting when they're not the oldest born, which is, of course, you look at that and you go, that's not just, that's not following the law all the time. Yet if you read in Galatians, it says, for if the inheritance comes by the law, it no longer comes by promise, but God gave it to Abraham by promise. So what he's pointing out is that God's blessing comes through God's promise, and not by anything we can earn or deserve. So the Bible is continually making the point that all God's blessings come for us trusting in His promises throughout the time. And that's why you have that repeated pattern through there. And the idea of, which you mentioned in an earlier lecture, that Ishmael would be a great nation, I don't think that means that God's going to reveal Himself through Ishmael, because God uses, the phrase is also used in other places in the Bible, great nation, for cities like Nineveh, which was a pagan city, which God was going to judge. And He's obviously using the word great nation as to big or numerous.
Yeah. I mean, there are different viewpoints on these questions, there's no doubt about that. One who takes the Bible as literally truth and the Word of God will obviously want to have some interpretation that starts with that as a premise and then explains the facts as we have it. One who does not start with that presupposition will see in these stories a certain sort of injustice is I think the best word that comes to mind here. I understand your point that whereas according to the traditions of the time the firstborn had prominence, and the important point in the Bible, as you said, is that it doesn't matter firstborn or secondborn, the blessings of God are more important than the chronology of birth. But what we also see, for example, if you look at the story of Jacob and Esau, and there is nothing in the Bible that shows that Esau has done anything wrong, really. And yet he gets slighted. So one asks why. How do you explain, for example, Esau selling his birthright to Jacob? Jacob turns out to be a man of very poor character on this occasion. Because the story has it that when Isaac was in his old age and he was about to die, he said to his son Esau, who was a hunter, go out and catch the game that is my favorite and cook the stew that I like to eat and bring it to me and I'll give you my blessing. Obviously understanding that the firstborn son should somehow get the blessing. So Esau goes out and he is hunting. But in the meantime, Jacob's mom, who was a different mother because Isaac had obviously multiple wives, Jacob's mom advises Jacob to quickly cook something and the same sort of stew and bring it to Isaac and get the blessing before his brother returns. So your brother goes out and does all of the work of hunting and whatever, and he comes back in the evening. But by this time, Jacob has already stolen the blessing, because he went to his father And now there was a problem, according to the story, that Esau was hairy and Jacob was smooth-skinned. So what was to be done about that? His mother advised him to put some goat skin on his wrist and on his neck, so that when he went up to his father was a little bit suspicious apparently. He said, the voice is the voice of Jacob. Are you really my son Esau? He says, yes. Come to me, my son. So the son comes close and he touches the goat skin and on the wrist and on the neck. And he's convinced, okay, so the voice is that of Jacob, but this is the skin of Esau. Okay, then he gives him the blessing. And it's only later in the evening when Esau comes back after having hunted and cooked the stew and everything, he brings it to his father. And his father said, I'm sorry, son, I've already given the blessing to your brother. And he weeps and whatever, but there's nothing that can be done. The blessing apparently cannot be reversed. So that's one occasion. On another occasion, we are told that Esau went out hunting and he came back quite hungry, starving, almost to the point of death. And he asks his brother to give him something to eat, and the brother says, Jacob says, only if you give me your birthright. Sell me your birthright for this bowl of soup or whatever it was. And Esau says, well, if I'm going to die anyway, what good is the birthright to me? Okay, you have my birthright, give me the bowl of soup. And he sells his birthright for the bowl of soup. But the other way of looking at that is that Jacob should not have demanded the birthright for the bowl of soup. He should have given that as an act of charity. I mean, that was the human thing to do. So you can see that the writers of the Bible do not see the injustice in that, or they do not see, or do not comment upon the wrong that Jacob is doing here. The whole point of the story is to represent Esau as a sort of a warrior, a wild sort of man. Jacob is the tame one. But we see the same thing happening here. Isaac is the tame one, he's the homeboy, and Ishmael becomes a wild donkey of a man. He becomes an archer, a warrior, and his hand would be against every man's hand. So this is a different way of looking at the same text. I understand that you'll have a different viewpoint, and conservative scholars will have a different viewpoint on that. But I believe the viewpoint that I have expressed is one that will commend itself to most persons who approach the text from a neutral point of view. Yes, all the way at the back.
Yeah, my question is more to do with the topic of the session, which is essentially that Islam, Judaism, and Christianity are all raised with the same light. If I view it from the viewpoint of Christ, Christ himself wasn't really a Christian, and his perspective was that everyone that came before him was a thief and a robber, which essentially to him meant what he meant when he said that was that everyone else that came before him was a servant of God as opposed to a son of God. So the elements of truth that they knew wasn't actually true, and what he came to reveal was the truth, and the truth was complete in what he taught and expressed. So he may not agree with some of the prophets in the Old Testament, and I don't see how Islam is necessarily a continuation of the stuff that he said.
Yeah, well, you know, the understanding of Christ today in Christianity is actually, according to historians, quite different from the actual Christ, the Jesus of history, let's put it that way. You have, for example, the entire Old Testament scriptures saying that there is only one God. You have the Quran saying that there is only one God. Okay, so that's Old Testament, that's Quran. And then in between, you have the proclamation 1 and 3. Now, obviously, this is the strange one here in Christianity. So we should ask, how did it go to 1 and 3? Muslims will say that there was one God in the beginning, and it continued to be one God throughout, and that's the same light revealed in the Quran, saying that there is only one God. And that the idea that there is 1 and 3 somehow is a development that started out with the preachings of Jesus, but did not stop with his preaching. It went on to include the preachings and teachings of other people as well. What do you make of, for example, the fact that in the Acts of the Apostles, you find that the original disciples of Jesus according to Acts chapter 5 in the last verse, they were going about preaching that Jesus is the Messiah.